Radical Media, Warrior Creed, with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. Today, we are discussing the topic of the peace talks in Islamabad between America and Iran. Round two, that is correct. Round two has been announced. You see on your screens now the topic for today's Warrior Creed live stream. Nuclear Pakistan sends 13,000 troops to Saudi Arabia while planning peace talks round two. Pakistan enters the chat. That's the subheading for the stream today. There is an image of the Pakistani troops next to the Saudi troops flag, both on each of their armbands. That is the image for today's stream. And it is being reported by multiple sources now that peace talks round two between the Americans and the Iranians could occur in Islamabad as early as this Thursday, prior to the 2-week deadline expiring that the President Trump had set for these peace talks to reach a conclusion. Some who had given up hope upon the departure of Vice President J.D. Vance from Islamabad to back to Washington, D.C., some who had declared these peace talks dead in the water are now surprised because the Pakistanis, ever the astute diplomats, have managed to secure, at least as according to multiple reports now, an agreement in principle from both the Iranians and the Americans that round two of these peace talks will occur in Islamabad as early as this Thursday. And we here on the Warrior Creed live stream are going to, over the course of this stream, bring you the breakdown of this news, its consequences, its implications for the region, how this came about, and the maneuvers in particular with regards to the Pakistani troop deployment of 13,000 soldiers to Saudi Arabia, how those maneuvers strategically impacted the decision by the Iranians and others to agree to enter round two of these peace talks. All of that coming up here on this Warrior Creed live stream. As soon as we play you these opening credits, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to break all these developments down for you and to provide you with hope that indeed a grand regional settlement for peace, orchestrated by President Trump and the Pakistanis, no least, is on the cards and is looking ever likely to be the outcome of the current impasse with regards to the Middle East. And if that comes about, it will be an end to a generational, lifelong perma war, because this, of course, is merely the latest chapter in a lifelong war that has engulfed the Middle East. And if this settlement is indeed reached in Pakistan, it will mean an end to that lifelong perma war and potentially a golden era for the Middle East, inherited by the Sunni Muslim occupants of the region who get to finally control their own destiny away from war and occupation. We're going to break all of that down for you. As we say, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these credits.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to the Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz, here on Radical Media. The topic for today's stream, once again on your screens: Nuclear Pakistan sends 13,000 troops to Saudi Arabia while planning peace talks round two. The Pakistanis, indeed, as we said in last week's stream, appear to have thrown a blinder. And here is the image for today's stream: Pakistani and Saudi flags next to each other to demonstrate the significance of the move of Pakistan sending 13,000 troops to Saudi Arabia. It was an enactment of the Mutual Pakistani-Saudi Defense Pact, or otherwise known colloquially as the Middle Eastern NATO. Pakistan decided to make some moves on the board to demonstrate that it took that mutual defense pact incredibly seriously. And the result, the upshot of those moves was clear for all to see, and that is that round two of these peace talks appear to be now on the table, well and truly. And to break all this down for you, we're going to start with the news of how it develops, and then get to the major announcement and the main source for these developments, which appear to have been Axios in the US and Reuters internationally. So we'll put this up on your screens now. Developments, it began here. This should be on your screens right about now. And that was, if you see on the Insider paper reported that the Pakistani Prime Minister says US-Iran ceasefire holding and efforts are underway to resolve issues. Now, the reason that particular image is important, and that particular, piece of news is important, is because initially there was some doubt as to whether or not the Pakistanis could indeed resurrect the peace talks, as it was assumed that these peace talks were dead in the water. But indeed, what instead happened was that the Pakistanis succeeded in resurrecting the peace talks. There was some conversation about the ceasefire no longer holding. There was some concern about the fact that the entire process had broken down when Vice President J.D. Vance announced that they had not reached an agreement and departed Islamabad. There were, of course, those who have little hope and no faith in the first place, but there were also those who were ideologically driven to make sure that these peace talks fail. Both camps put out the line, or the rumor now, as it turns out to be, that the peace talks had failed. Some of them appeared too keen and too salivating at the prospect that these peace talks had failed, and we put it to you, that's because some of them are indeed warmongers who have every vested interest in making sure these peace talks fail. Those are the ideologues, and among the ideologues, it's important to understand there are two categories. They are the Likudnik Zionists who believe in expanding Israel's borders into the West Bank, into Lebanon, into Syria, and making sure that their project of a greater Israel is achieved. The other ideologues, and by the way, we made it very specific in the language here, Likudnik Zionists, and that is, by the way, an objective that has been part of their political manifesto since before they came to government. The Likudnik Zionists, led by a coalition led by Netanyahu, but the main party of which is the Likud party. The second faction that gains and benefits from war, again, is the ideological faction of the Shia Islamists, theocracy in Iran that is currently occupying Iran. They gain from war because, again, their ideological belief is in exporting the revolution. Their belief is in leading the Middle East. They see themselves, the Shia Islamists, as leaders of the Middle East, including over the areas, the region's majority population who are Sunni Muslim. And by way of example, the Shia Islamist theocrats' conduct in Syria, and they're engaging in a brutal civil war to back the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, and prior to him, his father, Hafez al-Assad, a multi-generational dictatorship that was backed by the Shia Islamists in Iran. That's an example of them and their regional colonialism and their desire to dominate the region and its Sunni Muslims. Well, both of those camps who benefit from war for their own reasons are finding themselves increasingly isolated by President Trump and Pakistan's diplomatic efforts and push for peace, in the end resulting, as we hope to demonstrate over the course of this stream, in a grand regional settlement for peace. So there were two camps that were particularly salivating at the prospect of the peace talks failing. Then, of course, we said one of them were the ideologues. The other camp were those who have little hope and no faith. Of course, they will always exist. They are people that live in despair. You can online, you could recognize them by what's known as the Black Pill community, those who believe that we are headed irrevocably to Armageddon, to World War III, to the reign of the Antichrist, to a global technocracy. Nothing about that is inevitable. Everything about that remains to be resisted. And of course, the truth is that it's as if these people, the Black Pillars, those who live in permanent despair, it's as if they have come to the belief that Satan rules the universe and that only evil can ever win. And of course, then they wonder why they are sometimes confused with people that are deliberately pushing out this agenda in order to create the despair that they are apparently bemoaning. Perhaps some of them are indeed bewitched by the specter of evil to an extent that they've given up hope that there is such a thing as good and that God is indeed in control. But clearly, reality is against them, because reality this week is demonstrating that the peace talks are on the way to round two, and that increases their chances of success. Their chances of success indeed are looking quite good now because of this news. On your screens now, as the news developed, was Axios reporting, and you should see it very soon. Axios reporting that mediators will continue talks with the US and Iran in the coming days in an effort to bridge the remaining gaps and reach a deal. All parties still believe a deal is possible. The door is not yet closed. Both sides are bargaining. It's a bazaar. This from Axios was reported on the 13th of April. As you can see there on your screens, that's from Axios on the 13th of April. And again, when this report came out, it was initially a solitary report, and people began wondering whether indeed Axios had got it right, because so many people had given up on the idea that peace was indeed possible. Nevertheless, clearly it ended up being the case, and the report was followed up the next day by multiple other reports, which we're going to show you now. And initially, it was the main one from today that has caused the news to be pretty much verified now, and that is because Reuters have reported, according to multiple sources, that indeed round two of these peace talks are on the table. So we're going to show you that Reuters report now and read to you from it. This is the Reuters report. It is from today, and that is clear. You can see the date there. The 14th of April, headlined, US-Iranian teams could return to Islamabad for peace talks this week, multiple sources say. And it was really this Reuters article that put to bed rumors that Axios had got it wrong, and put to bed rumors that the peace talks were indeed over. Rather far from being over, they are about to enter round two. And as we're going to demonstrate, it looks like progress is being made. Very quickly, we'll read from that Reuters report for you. That's on your screens now. Negotiating teams from the US and Iran could return to Pakistan later this week to resume negotiations to end the war in the Gulf, Pakistani and Iranian officials say. So it is looking very, very optimistic. You can see there, Reuters reporting this news now, not from just one source or a rumor, but from multiple sources that they have confirmed. We'll continue reading there from that Reuters report. Pakistani and Iranian officials said on Tuesday, days after the first peace talks ended without a breakthrough. There was no immediate confirmation from US officials about the plans, which the Iranian and Pakistani officials discussed on condition of anonymity. A source who has been involved in the talk said a proposal had been sent to Washington and Tehran for the delegations to return to Islamabad to resume discussions. No date had yet been decided, but both countries could return as early as the end of this week. We're going to come to the matter of the date momentarily, because reports are now indicating it will be Thursday. We'll come to that. But to continue reading from that Reuters report we just showed you, an official at the Iranian embassy in Islamabad said the coming round of talks can sometime later this week or earlier next week, but nothing is finalized as of now. Earlier, a senior Iranian source told Reuters no firm date has been set, with the delegations keeping Friday through Sunday open. A senior Pakistani official said Islamabad had reached out to Iran and we got a positive response that they will be open to a second round of talks. The official and a second Pakistani source said Islamabad was communicating with both sides about the timing of the next round, and the meeting would be likely to take place over the coming weekend. So Reuters, when it initially had these multiple sources confirming that these peace talks were indeed set for round two, they were at that time of that news suggesting that the talks could be as early as this weekend. Now reports are suggesting as early as Thursday. We'll come to that in a moment. But as this news developed, Al Jazeera English began to report it. And the following clip is an Al Jazeera English report that we felt is relevant to play for you all. And it does indeed confirm this news. On your screens now, Al Jazeera English reports. Pakistani officials have told Al Jazeera they are offering Islamabad as the venue for the next round of US-Iran talks, with the ceasefire continuing to hold and both sides acknowledging that lines of communication remain open. Al Jazeera's Kamal Haider reports. And here is that Al Jazeera report. We think it's a good report. It's worth watching, and we'll play that for you now.
Wahid Asadi from Tehran. But first, let's go to Kamal Haider, who's live for us in Islamabad. Kamal, Pakistani officials telling us here at Al Jazeera that they're offering Islamabad as the next place for more talks. What are your sources telling you there?
Well, indeed, the first and most important thing that we have to take into consideration is the fact that the ceasefire is holding, which is a good thing. The other thing is that now both the United States and the Iranians are acknowledging that the lines of communication are open. Pakistan had said at the conclusion of the first round here in Islamabad that the lines of communication must remain open. At this time, we can say that while there was no breakthrough in that first meeting, there was no breakdown either. Both sides, of course, one has to understand, have had this animosity for over 4 decades. And you cannot solve and iron out these differences and problems within a matter of 24 hours. So this is a process, not a one-off, it's a diplomatic process, and it was not an event. Many people here in Islamabad thought that after the United States said that they failed to reach an agreement, was construed that that was the end of the road. But now there is a ray of hope, cautious optimism that the talks, the second round is likely to continue. There was a lot of progress achieved between the two sides. One must understand the Iranians sent another aircraft with technical experts. So there was agreement on several counts. And so there is optimism that if they sit together again, perhaps the crisis could be resolved before that ceasefire deadline runs out.
All right, so as you said there, Kamal, there is a sort of maybe a slither of optimism there. But remind us, Kamal, how or why Pakistan has ended up playing such a pivotal role here as mediator.
Well, first of all, one has to give credit to Pakistan's diplomacy. The fact that Pakistan has enjoyed historic religious fraternal relationship with the Iranians, and at the same time are in the good books of the Donald Trump administration, who considers the Pakistani field marshal to be his favorite, and the Pakistani prime minister, who had nominated him for the Nobel Prize, has endeared the Pakistani leadership to the Trump administration. So relations are definitely on an upward improvement trajectory, and that puts Pakistan in a very pivotal position. But this is not just Pakistan alone. Behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and particularly China played a pivotal role in supporting the Pakistani endeavor. And there is a hope and expectation that perhaps, for a change, some sort of a solution will be worked out between the United States and the Iranians.
All right, thank you very much. Kamal Haider there with the latest from Pakistani officials in Islamabad.
And as you all can see there from that footage from Al Jazeera English in Pakistan, making it very clear, people underestimated the level of shuttle diplomacy that had occurred after J.D. Vance left Islamabad. It's clear now that the round 2 of these peace talks is well and firmly on the way, around the corner, and there are positive signals coming from all directions. And the important part for those who had decided that these peace talks had already failed, that the over 40 years of war, as you heard there, this is a lifelong generational war, isn't ended by a mere event or a conference. That relative few hours that the Iranian delegation and the American delegation spent in Islamabad in round 1 of these talks, it would have been incredibly premature to assume that those few hours were sufficient to end around 40 years, a lifelong generational war in the Middle East. Of course, it's a process. Of course, it takes more than one sitting. Of course, the Iranian delegation needed to go back to Tehran and run by whoever their leader is over there in charge at the moment. It may well be Khamenei's son. Reports are he's disabled and severely impaired after a strike. But whoever's in charge over there, the Iranian delegation, because of course it was comprised of the Speaker of their parliament and others, need to go back and speak to them. And Vance, of course, needed to go back to speak to Trump. And so it appears as if respectively, both delegations have gone back to speak to their relative bosses and are coming back and ready and preparing for round two. It was always going to be a process. And to understand the nature of what we're dealing with here, is to understand that this latest round of strikes, the US-Israeli strikes on Iran, is not the beginning of this war. It is indeed near the end, in fact, of this war. If these peace talks succeed, near the end of the war. It's nowhere near the beginning of this war. It is merely one chapter, these latest strikes, one chapter in a generational, lifelong war. We mentioned the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Well, his father, Hafez al-Assad, was a dictator before him. Both father and son, supported by the Shia Islamist Iranian theocracy, against the will of the majority population in Syria, who are Sunni Muslims. Saudi Arabia and Turkey, Sunni Muslim majority countries, were backing the people of Syria against the Assad dynasty. That's just one example of a multi-generational war, proxy war that has been going on between the Shia Islamist theocrats in Iran and their neighbors in the region via the Shia Islamist terrorist proxies. Another example is in Lebanon, where the Shia Islamist theocrats funded and founded Hezbollah, a now proscribed terrorist organization. And again, Hezbollah were using Lebanon as a launchpad for their attacks against Israel, but also not considering the Lebanese national interest while doing so. By way of an example, the latest round of Hezbollah attacks into Israel after Israel and the US attacked Iran, Hezbollah attacked Israel from Lebanon without the approval of the Lebanese government. So when Israel started bombing Lebanon back, the Lebanese government stood back and said, hold on a minute, we didn't attack you. And then Israel said, well, these groups, these militia in your territory did, you better control them. Lebanon then banned Hezbollah. This has all happened in the last few weeks. So that's another example of how this war didn't just begin yesterday. Hezbollah for decades was being built up in Lebanon by the Iranians. Likewise with the Houthis in Yemen and the Iranian funding and founding of the Houthi militia in Yemen. And Yemen's terrible, devastating civil war and subsequent famine that involved this time not Lebanon and Iran, but Saudi Arabia and Iran, with Yemen as the theater of war. There's a third example. Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, the entire region was set on flames for the entire lifetime, our entire lifetime. We were witnessing these wars that centered around Iranian and Israeli regional competition for leadership of the Middle East, while there was no unified Sunni Muslim response because they were the ones on the receiving end of much of these attacks. Another example is the Iraq War, which again, because Iraq was 60% Shia, benefited, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein benefited the Shia Islamist theocracy, who via their proxies encouraged Cheney and the neocons in the Bush administration, Jr., to invade Iraq because the Iranian theocrats benefited from the overthrow of Saddam. They themselves had just come off the back of a multi-year war between Iran and Iraq. Then they got the Americans to do their dirty work for them. So here, these are multiple examples for how this war has been playing out. Gen X, at least, such as myself, a 48-year-old, have had their entire lives defined by this war. 9/11 was one chapter of this war, because don't forget that the support for terrorism around the region, depending on which particular terrorist group you're looking at, those terrorists were either proxies of the Iranian theocracy, such as Hamas in Gaza, funded by Iran, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, or indeed they were proxies of the CIA and the Israeli Mossad in the region to resist the Iranian proxies, such as Senator John Kerry's support for ISIS in Syria. And of course, it is no surprise that eventually al-Jawlani, the leader of al-Qaeda in Syria, ended up becoming Prime Minister Ahmad al-Shara, having reformed some of his ideological views, ended up allying with the US and NATO. These are all examples of how the region was engulfed in these proxy wars centered around the CIA and Israel on one side and the Shia Islamist theocrats on the other. The peace talks in Islamabad could finally be providing an end to this multi-generational, lifelong perma war. This is why the news is incredibly significant. It is why those talks in Islamabad were not an event, but they were a process requiring round one, round two. Indeed, who knows? In round two, perhaps the deadline is extended, or perhaps they reach a deal. Anything is possible because everything is still up for grabs. The important thing is that the peace talks have not failed, and they are continuing, and they are set to enter into round two. Now, J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, upon departing Islamabad, did say that he made the US's final offer and believed it was very fair. We're now putting you on screen for you as reported by somebody at Fox News, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News. What exactly were US Vice President J.D. Vance's demands to the Iranian theocracy? These are on your screens now. This is apparently the final offer made by the Americans that J.D. Vance said he left with the Iranians before he departed Islamabad. And you can see them there. There's 6 points there. We'll just read that for you. That's on your screens. Vice President Vance's final offer delivered to the Iranian delegation in Islamabad includes the following red lines according to US officials. 1. End all uranium enrichment. 2. Dismantle all major nuclear enrichment facilities. 3. Retrieve highly enriched uranium. 4. Accept a broader peace, security, and de-escalation framework that includes regional allies. 4 is important there. Just keep 4 in mind. We're going to come to it in a second. 5. Ending funding for terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. 6. Fully open the Strait of Hormuz, charging no tolls for passage. So those 6 points, according to Lucas Tomlinson at Fox News, are the final offer made by J.D. Vance, Vice President of the US, before he departed Islamabad. Now, we did say to you, pay special attention to point 4 there. We'll read it again for you. Accept a broader peace, security, and de-escalation framework that includes regional allies. That point there is important, because prior to this latest round of strikes against Iran by the US and Israel, don't forget that President Trump set up a Gaza peace board. On that Gaza peace board sat multiple Sunni Muslim majority countries, including nuclear power Pakistan, including NATO member Turkey, including Islamic leader, Sunni Muslim leader Saudi Arabia, including Egypt, including the Sunni Muslim world's most populous Sunni Muslim majority country, Indonesia, and even Hamas signed up to Trump's Gaza peace board. Now, Israel, under Netanyahu, had not signed up to that peace board. I'm going to take your minds back to something that happened at the time that Trump set up that Gaza peace board. If you remember, it was after the 12-day war between Iran and Israel. And President Trump declared an end to that conflict. And if you recall, there was that speech he gave on the tarmac where he told the Israelis to stop bombing and said that they better get in line, otherwise he's going to be very upset with them. And that was a moment where people began realizing that perhaps President Trump isn't quite so in the pocket of Netanyahu as some of the online panicons are suggesting. Well, that was then. But what happened? When Trump set up the Gaza peace board, all of those countries we named joined, but Iran and Israel didn't. In other words, the two ideologues, the two warmongers that we named at the front, at the top of this stream, did not join Trump's Gaza peace board. However, even among the warmongers, there is a pecking order, if you like, because, of course, the Shia Islamist theocracy is worse than in terms of from a philosophical perspective than the democracy as flawed as it clearly is, including with the ethnic cleansing in Gaza, the principle of a theocracy is worse than the principle of a democracy. And Israel, at least in principle, is a democracy. What happened next was that Netanyahu did, in the end, reluctantly join Trump's Gaza peace board, leaving, again, as we suggested would be the case because of the pecking order, leaving the only country that is regionally concerned with this conflict to not have joined Trump's Gaza peace board, the Shia Islamist theocracy in Iran. So these strikes ended up, as we're about to see, sufficiently isolating Iran, forcing them to the negotiating table, forcing them to accept the regional peace. And that's why point 4 in the demands published accordingly, that are the US Vice President J.D. Vance's demands, reportedly. Point 4 in those demands is very clear that Iran, we'll just put it up on your screens again for you so you can see it, that Iran accepts a broader peace, security, and de-escalation framework that includes regional allies. In other words, that the Iranian theocracy, you can see there, point 4, right? In other words, that the Iranian theocracy accept that it's going to have to be part of the grand regional settlement for peace, rather than oppose the grand regional settlement for peace that we've said has been coming for a long time. And clearly, we still believe that is what's going to happen. And so point 4 there is a call for Iran to join the Grand Regional Settlement for Peace instead of trying to obstruct it, because the Iranian theocracy was the only country that had not yet joined Trump's Gaza peace board. Remember, Netanyahu reluctantly did only a couple of weeks prior to these US, Israel, Iran strikes. And one perhaps suspects that the carrot offered to the Israelis to join Trump's Gaza peace board and accept the peace terms dictated by President Trump through strength, in other words, peace through strength. Perhaps the incentive for the Israelis was that if you do join the peace board, we will strike Iran until they also agree to join. It's very interesting, but that they were the terms. And Pakistani diplomat Maliha Lodi, a well-known Pakistani diplomat, has suggested that the talks that are pending will now be focused on technicalities, a term which indicates that most of the broad generalities of the talks have been agreed to. That's on your screens now by former Pakistani ambassador to various countries, including New York, Maliha Lodi, encouraging signs that another round of US-Iran talks may take place soon, most likely in Islamabad. Seems it will be at a technical level. There you can see that. And underneath that, reported by Kalshi, just in, US-Iran negotiations to reportedly be held on Thursday. You can see that too there on your screens. And that is the report that we referred to earlier, that the talks could begin as early as Thursday. Barak Ravid of Axios demonstrates here with his often exclusive reports that he gets early. The US asked Iran to accept a 20-year moratorium on uranium enrichment during negotiations in Islamabad over the weekend, according to a US official and a source with knowledge. And we'll read a little quote from that Axios article by Barak Ravid there. The US proposed that Iran accept a 20-year moratorium on uranium enrichment during negotiations in Islamabad over the weekend. The Iranians, it says at the end, last line now, the Iranians countered with a shorter single-digit period, according to sources. So clearly, J.D. Vance's terms around the uranium and to end all enrichment and to hand the enriched uranium to America, no longer allowing the Iranian theocrats to keep any enrichment whatsoever, that's all part of the negotiations. The Americans want a 20-year moratorium. The Iranians are asking for a shorter period, whether it's 5 years or wherever it may be. But the reason these technicalities that we've just reported from Maliha Lodi, she's saying that the former Pakistani ambassador, that these are, the talks are now focused on technicalities. Here is an example of the technicalities, whether the uranium enrichment is halted for 20 years, as the Americans are demanding, or less than that, perhaps 5 years, as the Iranians may be demanding. These sorts of technicalities are encouraging, because it is easier to see that terms can be arrived at if the subject matter in round 2 is about whether we hold uranium enrichment for 20 years, 19 years, 10 years, 5 years. It's easier to arrive at a compromise when we're discussing a duration. That's an example of the technicalities that these talks will be focused around. It would become very difficult to conceive of the Iranians and the Americans not being able to arrive at a number between 0 to 20 years for halting uranium enrichment. Of course, the Americans demanding 20, perhaps they'll be satisfied with 19, perhaps 18, perhaps 15, perhaps 10, but they will eventually find a number, an equilibrium between them and the Iranians, between the number of years 0 to 20, that both sides will be okay to deal with. It is almost inevitable when you understand that's what the talks now will be focusing around. For example, on one of the most controversial topics, as President Trump said upon the J.D. Vance's return from Islamabad, that they agreed on most things except for the nuclear issue. Well, here it is. Now they're down to the technicalities of how many years they will agree to kick this into the long grass. And that is all very encouraging. It indicates that a solution is very well in sight. And then the Financial Times of London came with the very optimistic news to confirm all of this that we've been reading to you. And that is, as you see on your screens right now, the latest from the Financial Times, that the Iranian President Pezeshkian confirmed that Iran is indeed open to talks with the US. And so the Iranian president has confirmed it now. The Iranians are open to these talks. And indeed, that is why it leads us to the conclusion that is on your screens now. A grand regional settlement for peace is coming. Barak Ravid of Axios says, US officials tell me there is continued engagement between the US and Iran and forward motion on trying to get an agreement. We see this as mere confirmation that a grand regional settlement for peace is coming. Hot Dog Not Dog below comments on our commentary by saying, you're the only one I've seen calling this. If it goes anywhere close to that, then that's a fine reading of the situation. Well, we can assure you that that is the direction it's headed. Those of you who have been following the Warrior Creed live stream over the long term know that this has been our stance from the beginning. A grand regional settlement for peace is indeed coming. It is going to end this multi-generational, lifelong perma-war focused on the Middle East, but engulfing the entire planet, that is risking us all tipping into World War III. We will avoid World War III. We will avoid what's known as the Thucydides trap, and that is a phenomenon where an existing superpower is being approached by a insurgent superpower. And usually in history, when that happens, so think US and China, when the insurgent superpower is seeking to overtake, usually it leads to war. That's known as the Thucydides trap. Well, if what Trump is able to achieve, and last week we quoted his own assessment of himself, believing himself to be, as he said, a very stable genius. If his own assessment of himself does indeed hold, then he may well have succeeded in avoiding the Thucydides trap, and that is World War III, by reconciling the Middle East. And if you reconcile the Middle East, you reconcile everything else, because most of the wars, as clearly everybody can see by now, are focused around the Middle East and its future. Why? Because most of the energy reserves and most of the strategic passages, whether Al-Bab al-Mandeb Strait on one end of Saudi Arabia or the Hormuz Strait on the other end of Saudi Arabia, two bottlenecks for shipping energy and oil in particular from Saudi Arabia to the world, and indeed above the Bab al-Mandeb, even the Suez Canal, a bottleneck again in a Sunni Muslim country, Egypt. You can see why the Middle East is so crucial to fix if we want peace in the world today, because it's about access to this energy and the competing claims over this energy that all of this is flaring up. But it's looking very optimistic, to such an extent that there are, we would admit, currently optimistic reports that the President Trump himself may be going to Pakistan for round 2 of these talks. Now, that is, we admit, an optimistic assessment, but if it does turn out to be true, it would be quite something and would perhaps indicate that the peace terms have already been agreed, because one wouldn't expect President Trump to go unless he knew in advance that the terms were already agreed. So that's all left for grabs. But we're going to show you that report on your screen just because it is being spoken of. And this is a post by Sajid Darar, who is the founder of Pakistanis for MAGA, Pakistanis for Trump in the US. Not just a nobody, And he's reporting, as you can see here, on your screens now, chatter is everywhere in Washington, D.C., that President Trump is going to Islamabad, Pakistan himself to meet the Irani delegation to finalize the Islamabad Accord. Well, underneath that, Ashok Swain, Pakistan is soon going to host the second round of Islamabad talks between Iran and the US. It will give second round of heartburn to the Indian media. So if Sajid Tarar's reports that these rumors in Washington, D.C., that Trump is planning to go to Islamabad himself are true, it would be incredible. We have reserved judgment at this stage, but say to you simply that if President Trump were to go to Islamabad, if President Trump announces at any stage before this weekend that he's planning to go, then what you should read into that is that the peace deal has already been agreed behind the scenes. There's no way President Trump will fly to Islamabad to return empty-handed. Simply not going to happen. And anybody that would advise him to do so without those terms already being agreed and it being a mere formality for him to show up would be an incredibly bad advisor to the president. President Trump would, we think it's almost inevitable this is the case, would only go if terms were already agreed. So if you do hear that announcement, then you may see it as an incredibly positive indication that World War III has been aborted. If indeed Trump announces he's going to Islamabad. And he would then, if he does announce it, he would very likely come home with a deal, at which point people will be truly rejoicing. And so we are just commenting again on some of these reports as they're developing, because some of them are not yet confirmed and they're live and unfolding as we are on air. So we're just bringing you these reports to give you our reaction to them in case they do transpire. And another such report is by commentator Ibrahim Qazi on your screens now, that we've quoted here, and we'll read the quote first and then our response to it. The Pakistani government is reportedly, he says, exploring the possibility of hosting a US/Islamic World Heads of State Summit in Pakistan as part of efforts to advance the US-Iran peace process. During the second Organization of Islamic Countries Summit, 35 heads of state were in attendance at Lahore. You can see that on your screens. We've commented above it. And end to this accursed, lifelong, multi-generational Perma war is finally within sight. Pakistan, seize the moment and do not let go. Praise be to Allah. That is our response to that, which if Pakistan does indeed succeed in not only attracting President Trump to come to Pakistan or Islamabad, but also simultaneously leaders of the Islamic world, especially those that join Trump's Gaza Peace Board, all convene in Pakistan, it truly would be the beginning of this grand regional settlement for peace being displayed to the world for all to see. Because, of course, most people are still doubting Thomas's, despite the fact that every step of this process we have forecasted from 2-3 years ago. And our regulars know this. And at every stage, we say, this is going to happen next. This is going to happen next. On the first day of these strikes, I appeared on GB News America with Bev Turner. I'm going to play you the clip and said, this is going to end in Pakistan activating its mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia and forcing Iran to come to terms. That is explicitly stated when on night one of these strikes, the US-Israeli strikes on Iran, I said that on GB News America with Bev Turner. We'll play you the clip, but people still doubt that this is what's going on. People are unable to see what is beneath their very noses because they're not interpreting reality as it is, which of course is always a process. It's always an effort, but they're not even anywhere near interpreting reality as it is. They are interpreting reality through the lens of their ego and are projecting onto reality what their desires and passions are, including who they wish to be wrong and who they wish to prove wrong, rather than reading reality without ego as it is. And that's where most people, when they misread situations, that's how and why they do so. Moving on to how this came about. So we've just gone into the fact that these peace talks are entering round 2. How did it come about? There was a period after round 1 ended and Vance left Islamabad and the Iranian delegation left before round two was announced. There was a period where, as we said, two factions, the ideologues and the black pillars, those two factions, the expansionist, warmongering ideologues of the Likudnik Zionists, as well as the Shia Islamist theocrats, and also the black pillars, those who live in despair and don't want anybody else to have hope either. Those two factions began relishing at the thought, for different reasons, that these peace talks had come to an end and had failed. Of course, the warmongers salivating at the prospect of resuming war, and the black pillars really relishing it because their ego was delighted that they could finally be proven right, and that they could disprove those who had told them that they're black pillars and should just simply be quiet because they don't know what they're talking about. And their ego wanted to disprove those people. And so, again, they were relishing at the thought of these peace talks failing. That hasn't happened. And we're going to now go into why it didn't happen. And so what key to this has been the reaction of Pakistan activating, as we said it would, activating their mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia, thereby forcing the Shia Islamist theocracy occupying Iran to recalibrate and recalculate their strategic calculations for the region. Because, of course, if you remember, the Iranian theocrats had been bombing their Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors when Iran was being bombed by the Americans and the Israelis. Their calculation was somehow that when the US and Israel bomb Iran, if Iran starts bombing its Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors, that somehow the US and Israel would suffer. The truth is, what it did is it isolated the Iranian theocrats even further, because from one end of their mouth, they were demanding that the Sunni Muslims of the world rise up under their leadership in a global jihad, right, against America and Israel, while the very people they wanted to rise under their own leadership in that global jihad, they were simultaneously bombing. How did they expect Sunni Muslims to rally behind them while they were bombing Sunni Muslims? That was the twisted logic of the Shia Islamist theocracy in Iran. But of course, to ideologues, that logic doesn't appear twisted. To ideologues, you see, those who are zealots, such as the Shia Islamist theocrats, and generally all theocrats, whether they're Sunni Islamist, such as the Taliban or Hamas, or Shia Islamist, such as the regime in Iran, or indeed Hezbollah and the Houthis, all Shia Islamist, or indeed in Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah, again, a Shia Islamist faction. So whether they're Sunni Islamist or Shia Islamist, the theocrats are unable to see reality for what it is. They believe that because God's on their side, they are owed allegiance by Sunni Muslims. And that kind of arrogance and haughtiness that God is on your side is what prevented them from seeing that by bombing Sunni Muslim Arabs, it's not necessarily the best approach to try and get them to rally behind you. Only those who are deluded in their own self-righteousness because God is on their side would have failed to see that. And that's exactly what happened with the Shia Islamist theocrats. They failed to see that all they ended up achieving was isolating themselves from the Sunni Muslim region. Instead, what happened, as we're going to demonstrate to you now, is that Pakistan entered the chat. By activating its strategic Middle Eastern NATO defense pact with Saudi Arabia, they forced the Iranian theocracy to reconsider and recalibrate their regional calculations, because the Iranians have a good relationship with nuclear Pakistan, but also the Iranians cannot actually fight nuclear Pakistan. Nuclear Pakistan would destroy Iran in a war because it's a nuclear country, like America, like Britain, like France, whereas Iran is not a nuclear power. So there is no parity when it comes to the Iranian theocracy's military might and the Pakistanis. In addition, Iran doesn't have a navy. So when Pakistan decided this, as is on your screens now, reported by South Asia Index, the Iranians had to concede and agree to round two of their talks and ditch their haughtiness. What happened? As you can see there, we'll read it for you. Pakistan deployed a huge military contingent comprising 13,000 soldiers and 12 to 18 fighter jets in Saudi Arabia. Pakistan is likely to deploy at least 50,000 soldiers in Saudi Arabia, along with more fighter jets, sources say. The deployment in Saudi Arabia is part of strategic defense agreement that both countries signed last year. This deployment has come amid the escalating tensions in the Middle East and the US-Iran talks fail in Islamabad. South Asia Index continued to report Pakistan military chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, as Trump calls him his favorite field marshal, and Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif to visit Saudi Arabia in the next 48 hours. This is happening when Pakistan has deployed a contingent of 13,000 soldiers and 12 to 18 fighter jets in Saudi Arabia as part of their defense agreement. So you can see there very clearly, Pakistan, after the first round of those peace talks in Islamabad, apparently failed, or at least didn't appear to succeed. Pakistan activated its mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia, activating the Middle East and NATO, deploying 13,000 troops to Saudi Arabia, promising to send 50,000 troops to Saudi Arabia. If Iran had resumed striking its Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors, assuming these peace talks had failed, if Iran resumed sending more missiles to its Muslim neighbors than it even sent to Tel Aviv, as they did in round one of these conflicts, then all that would have happened is they would have ended up sending missiles towards Pakistani troops. That would have dragged Pakistan into the war. Nuclear power Pakistan would have been dragged into the war. Pakistan has an air force, Iran doesn't. Their neighbors. Pakistan has a nuclear weapon, Iran doesn't. Their neighbors. Guess what would have happened? Iran would have been obliterated. So Iran, looking at this scenario, not wanting to drag their neighborly country that they also trust in peace negotiations, Pakistan, not wanting to drag them into the war. Keep in mind that the world's second largest Shia Muslim population outside of Iran happens to be in Pakistan, even though Pakistan is majority Sunni Muslim. From memory, forgive me if this is wrong, but from memory, roughly 13% or so of the country's Muslims are Shia. So Iran didn't want to alienate Pakistan for both military and diplomatic and political and religious reasons. There's a long history of relationships between those two countries. It was almost inconceivable to go to war against Pakistan. So once Pakistan redeployed troops to Saudi Arabia, activating its mutual defense agreement with Saudi Arabia, the Iranians were forced to come to terms and agree to round two of these peace negotiations. This is exactly what I said on Bev Turner's GB News America would happen, which we're going to play you right now, just so you can see and be reminded of that. Before we do, just going to go through more of exactly what these troop deployments by Pakistan into Saudi Arabia mean. Our response to that immediately is on your screens now. We've said, again, after the first round of peace talks appeared to fail, this is what we said. It seems that Iran and Israel have not come to terms. So, strategic calculations in the Middle East are changing forever. Nuclear Pakistan has deployed boots on the ground in defense of Saudi Arabia pursuant to their mutual defense pact. That is on your screens now. And we'll quickly play for you the GB News clip, which really kind of reminds everybody of how this was always going to play out. It's what we said right at the start. And remember, this is from night one of the conflicts on GB News America with Bev Turner. You've now heard Pakistan deploying 13,000 troops to Saudi Arabia. This is exactly what we said would happen.
What's going on?
You've been saying for, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least a year now that you think you were looking at a grand regional settlement. You think the Middle East is about to enter a period of prolonged peace, the likes of which we've probably not seen. Well, I've not seen, we've not seen in our lifetime. Is that looking more likely or less likely tonight, Majid?
Well, I'm going to say something counterintuitive, but you probably could predict my answer, Bev. I think it's looking more likely. And the reasons for that is that one of the unintended consequences of Iran's calculated escalation, Iran deliberately escalated by attacking Sunni Muslim Arab Gulf countries who were not involved. Saudi Arabia had prohibited the US from using its air bases prior to this attack, which is why they're so upset with what Iran did. So their calculated escalation was done in order to drag everybody else into the war, because when they're fighting for their existential existence, it suits them to have as many parties for and against them in the war, because if you broaden the conflict, Russia gets involved, Iran has more supporters and therefore more chance of surviving. So that's what they tried to do. What's happened instead is, because of the Pakistani, Saudi, Turkey joint military defense pact, when Saudi has said now that it would support the US in any war effort necessary because they're so upset with what Iran literally bombed them, right? So Saudi has said to America, we will support you by any means necessary. That drags in nuclear Pakistan because of the defense pact they signed about 6 months ago. Now, when you end up with that kind of escalation, Iran, I think, miscalculated here. The only option left, and they are logical people, Persians can be very logical, right? The only option left does mean come to terms in a post-Khomeini context and agree a peace deal. I do think that's what's going to happen. Iran cannot oppose countries such as Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia when they come together, as they have done, in a mutual defense pact. It's just too much for Iran to deal with.
Told you he's the best person on this topic, everybody. Majid Nawaz there, summing it up brilliantly and hopefully giving people reason to sleep better tonight rather than worse. And that's what I was wanting us to do, is to allay the fears of people in the UK that this is the start of World War III. I know that everybody at home in the UK is incredibly worried about this situation. And thank you, Majid. I really appreciate it. What fascinating insight, my friend. I will speak to you very soon.
And there you have it. That, as you can see there, from night one of the strikes, the minute these strikes occurred, that was our analysis, because our regulars know we have said we are on this path and have been for multiple years. This isn't something that President Trump invented yesterday. Indeed, President Trump's first term was already making moves to bring this about. And you can see in President Trump's first term, Operation Restore Hope. We've mentioned it before on Warrior Creed. We've referenced it. We've quoted it from the Times of London. If you go to majidnawaz.substack.com, go to Radical Media there via majidnawaz.substack.com, use the search facility on the Radical Media page, search Operation Restore Hope. You will find how even in Trump's first term, they were already laying the groundwork for cooperation, NATO, American, Turkey cooperation with Erdogan in Syria to end the Syrian civil war. It was called Operation Restore Hope. The fall of Damascus, the removal of Assad, the Iranian stooge, and his asylum in Moscow, and the rising to power of the former leader of Al-Qaeda, since reformed, and now Prime Minister Ahmed al-Sharaa, his rising to power was facilitated and aided by the Turks and the Saudis with President Trump's backing. Operation Restore Hope in his first term. All of this has been many years in the making. It is no surprise that the Russian Navy voluntarily withdrew from Syria. They did not put up a fight, which is why Bashar al-Assad in the end had to flee. He knew his friends had abandoned him. The Russians gave the signal. At the end of the day, the Iranians weren't the ones securing Assad, though they were supporting him via their terrorist proxy militia, Hezbollah. Being neighbors as they are, they were the ones able to send in the terrorists of Hezbollah to brutally murder and massacre the Syrian population at Assad, the dictator's behest. But it was the Russians putting the international guys in the form of their navy to protect the Iranian proxy of Assad against the Americans. Once they were that navy voluntarily, the signal was given. Assad fled Damascus to Moscow. Ahmed al-Sharaa came to power, and Restore Hope, in helping the Turks with, managed to manifest itself. This is a multi-year plan. It's not something that's been happening overnight, and that's why we are well and truly on the way regional settlement. I'm going to continue demonstrating for you with the rest of this stream, because of course there are more reports indicating that that is exactly what's been happening. So what with the 13,000 troop deployment to Saudi Arabia, the calculation had to change. They had to agree to round two. Pakistani analyst and international affairs professor Ishtiaq Ahmed has already also agreed to this analysis by posting the following. It's on your screens now. We're just going to read it. Saudi Arabia's deployment of 13,000 additional Pakistani troops and 18 fighter jets to King Abdulaziz Air Base, taking the total Pakistani presence to around 23,000, is not a routine military move. It is a calibrated signal issued at the height of the crisis. Deterrence without escalation. Coming alongside the Islamabad talks, it reinforces a clear threshold already conveyed through diplomatic and military channels, any renewed targeting of Saudi energy infrastructure will not remain contained. This operationalizes the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement and translates Pakistan's earlier warnings to a visible capability on the ground. At the same time, this deployment sits within a broader diplomatic strategy. It strengthens Riyadh's security at a moment of vulnerability while preserving the space for negotiation that Pakistan has helped construct. By combining deterrence in the Gulf with mediation in Islamabad, Pakistan has positioned itself to manage both escalation risks and diplomatic continuity. The message is precise. Talks remain open, but the cost of breaking the ceasefire, particularly in the Gulf, has now been clearly raised. That's by Ishtiaq Ahmed, Pakistani international affairs professor. We couldn't have put it better ourselves, pretty much summarizing what we've been saying here on Warrior Creed for many, many years, and that is that the Grand Regional Settlement for Peace has become a strategic priority. And other people are beginning to notice. On your screens now is a user who has commented after these recent developments, Zeng Forum, saying all of this indicates that the US forces will reduce or withdraw in the region. We've said, correct, someone's paying attention. And that is clearly what's going to happen. Just to make this absolutely clear for you, you can see that on your screens now, that this user believes the US forces are going to leave the region. Indeed, that is part of the Grand Regional Settlement for Peace. Let's make this very clear for everybody. One of the very stable genius acts of a very stable genius, that is President Trump in his own self-description, one of the benefits of that being that plan, the Grand Regional Settlement for Peace, is that it resolves the conundrum of the relationship between the petrodollar for oil, in other words, as we said, it's about energy, the petrodollar for oil, with the presence of American troops in the Middle East, which go all the way back to the years of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Feels like a different lifetime ago. It was always the problem. Bin Laden launched 9/11 saying US troops get out of the Middle East. Iran has always used that as a sore point. It's why the Iranian missiles landed in Sunni Muslim Arab countries after these recent US-Israeli strikes. What was Iran claiming it was striking? Of course, we know it struck airports in Kuwait, for example. It struck industrial zones in Syria. It was a lie. But what they were claiming they were only targeting, and of course they did target, in many instances, they did target this, were US bases in the Middle East. So the Iranian missiles were going to those bases because they know it's an easy way to rally Sunni Muslims behind them, to say, look, these US troops are occupying your countries and your rulers are mere proxies for American hegemony and colonialism. That was the line. Well, to fix those two problems, problem one, the issue of the energy, competition over the energy, in other words, the oil, and the weakening of the petrodollar vis-a-vis that energy, and problem two, the US presence of troops on the ground in those bases in the Middle East. To fix both those problems, Pakistanis entered the chat. How? Because if you say, okay, to avoid the Thucydides trap, to avoid World War III, we will remove American troops from the region, such as we did from Afghanistan. We will remove voluntarily, as we did in Afghanistan. Remember, Trump laid the foundations for the troop withdrawal in Afghanistan during his first term. Yes, the chaotic nature of that withdrawal happened under President Biden, but the principle of the withdrawal itself was a decision made by Trump, mediating with the Taliban, as the Americans were, in none other than Qatar, or Qatar, as some people like to say. Qatar, right? So the Americans and the Taliban were negotiating in Qatar, mediated by the Qataris, and they agreed to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan unilaterally, handing power back to what was inevitably and always going to be the majority force, the Pashtuns. Happen to be the Taliban at the moment, but they're ethnically mainly Pashtuns. And when Trump laid that foundation, it's an indication that President Trump is seeking an end to perma wars by removing the presence of troops in the Middle East. But who fills the void? Because, of course, if you don't have American troops in the Middle East, there's a danger you end up with Russian bases and Russian and Chinese troops in the Middle East. And, of course, that isn't a solution to the problem. It's simply another problem. And so what it appears, and this is the Grand Regional Settlement for Peace, we're very convinced this is the case. We caveat our language only because there are, of course, so many naysayers out there. But what we are convinced is the case, and what appears to be the case, is that Trump, again, go back to Operation Restore Hope, go back to the unilateral withdrawal from Afghanistan. Indeed, you can even see it in Venezuela with a deal cut with the second line of command in Venezuela. Trump has agreed to withdraw the troops in return for the people of the region governing their own region, as long as they agree to continue selling him the oil. That's the deal. That's what was done in Venezuela. China got roughly 80% of its oil from Venezuela. The deal that was cut with Chavez's second in command people, it was that you can stay in power. Just sell us your oil first, not to the Chinese. Likewise, take that analogy, put it into the Middle East. This is the main, actually, the most important deal, more so than the Venezuelans. The deal was made with the Sunni Muslims who inhabit the Middle East. You can inherit your own lands. You can become masters of your own dominion. You can steer and chart your own course. Sunni Muslim Arabs will finally get to rule their own destiny. Even prior to the collapse of the Ottoman Caliphate, by the way, Sunni Muslim Arabs weren't in charge. For centuries, the Turks ruled them. They had lost control of their own lands and resources many centuries prior to this. After the Turks and the collapse, at least the Turks, of course, were Sunni Muslims from the region. But after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1924, the British ruled them. And of course, after the British, these independent states were set up and the Iranian-Israeli competition for the region began. The Americans invaded the area, and the Sunni Muslim Arabs have been occupied and war-torn ever since. Well, finally, President Trump is saying, okay, we will pull all of our troops out of the region. If you police yourselves, we have one condition, and that is that you sell us your oil. You do not prevent us from buying that oil and sell it instead to the Chinese and the Russians, but rather you keep the arrangements we have. The petrodollar thereby is shored up, and the Sunni Muslim Arabs, as represented by the leaders of Saudi Arabia in the form of Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, the ruling crown prince, soon to be king, and indeed the Pakistanis, who provide the muscle for this arrangement, all of them came to terms. This was all agreed on in Trump's first term. And you can see the results of it in the form of the Gaza Peace Board. All of this has already been agreed. Everything is playing out in accordance to the agreement. The Pakistani troops will enter the region. Eventually, the US troops will leave the region. Sunni Muslim troops of the Sunni Muslim majority nuclear power, Pakistan, will end up guaranteeing the security of the region, the role that Turks used to play in the Ottoman Caliphate. It will now be played by the nuclear Sunni Muslim majority country, Pakistan. And Saudi Arabia, indeed, will be the leader of this arrangement, being, of course, based in the two holy lands as it is, Mecca and Medina, the custodians of the two holy mosques as they are, and the owners of the oil. So the financial arrangement will be that the Saudis shore up Pakistan's economy and the Pakistanis provide the security guarantees under a nuclear umbrella for a rise of Sunni Muslim reign in the Middle East. This is the beginning of a new era. The Sunni Muslims will finally be ruling their own lands. They will inherit their own lands. It's the return of a Sunni Muslim regional power bloc that will eventually be competing with the Chinese and Russian and American power blocs. That is how this is going to unfold. This is all, of course, long-term, but you can see it playing out already. And so the US troops will eventually withdraw. We've mentioned in return that the Saudis will be financing the Pakistanis in return for the security nuclear umbrella and the security guarantees. Well, you can see that on your screens now. Clash report. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have assured Pakistan of $5 billion in financial aid to help stabilize its foreign reserves. The support comes as Pakistan prepares to repay $3.5 billion to the United Arab Emirates by the end of April. And of course, the Emiratis requested their money back. The Emiratis did not agree to the ceasefire because they were allied closer to the Likud than they were to the Saudis. But this has all come as a shock to the Emiratis. They are the ones who have been caught off guard by this. And it's why we have mentioned the history between Pakistan and the Emirates as a bit of a reminder here as well. The user reported as Amjad Taha said, as long as the UAE is not in Islamabad, JD Vance and the Islamic regime in Iran will fail in Pakistan. The UAE does not and will not accept the Islamic regime in Iran controlling access to the Strait of Hormuz, nor possessing nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, drones, or anything else. Well, the UAE not being present in Islamabad does not, in fact, guarantee the failure of the talks. And we reminded this user, Mr. Taha, of the following. In a tweet that, considering our shadow ban, got quite a few impressions. It's always odd, isn't it, with 500,000 followers and losing every day because of the shadow banning of Musk of our platforms, despite that shadow banning, this particular post got 116,000 views and counting. What we said was, in the 1970s and 1980s, Pakistani officers served as the first 5 chiefs of air staff for the UAE Air Force, and over 50% of UAE Air Force pilots were Pakistani. As of 2004, there were approximately 55 Pakistani flying instructors in the UAE Air Force, with a few personnel serving in the Army and Navy. Pakistan continues to provide foundational training to the UAE Armed Forces, including commando battalions and artillery corps, but the UAE now maintains a force of 150,000 active personnel as of 2025-2026 data that is predominantly Emirati. Now, the point of this was to demonstrate that Pakistani military dominance of the region didn't begin yesterday. We've stated it multiple times. Pakistan is the Muslim world's Shia or Sunni Muslim world's only nuclear power. They have a very strong navy. They are battle tested against India in multiple wars. This is a country that has militarily long dominated the Middle East. It is just showing its hand now. The only other country that comes close is Turkey. The Turks have a very strong army, but they are also importantly a member of NATO. So any attack, as the Likudnik Zionists are rumoring at the moment that they wish to consider Turkey their new Iran and their new enemy, what they're missing is any attack on Turkey is an attack on NATO, and Turkey merely needs to trigger Article 5, and they trigger the mutual defense of all NATO powers against any country that has attacked them. And that's why Turkey or Turkey is a very significant military power when it comes to this Grand Regional Settlement for Peace. And they are involved on the side of Pakistan. They have been in Syria in Operation Restore Hope, involved on the side of Trump. But when it comes to this Middle Eastern NATO and the Pakistan-Saudi Mutual Defense Pact, the Turks already said they want to join. Pakistan has a very strong history with Turkey. They are, as we say, the second only country that could come close to Pakistani military dominance. And then that third country, Saudi Arabia, because of its prestige in being leader of the Islamic world. Those are the 3 countries you need. No other country is relevant. Of course, they're nice. Of course, they're brothers. Of course, they're friends. They simply don't have the power to influence the region. Even Egypt, a close fourth, doesn't have the power. The region comes down to those 3: Pakistan, Turkey, led by Saudi Arabia. But of course, Pakistan and Turkey providing the military backing, Saudi Arabia providing the financing. If in that framework the UAE wishes to get involved, they can help with financing. But having reclaimed the 3.5 billion money from Pakistan, because the UAE was opposing the peace negotiations, the Saudis stepped in and promised 5 billion back to Pakistan to cover that gap. And that is as reported on your screens now by Geo News, confirming all of this for you. You can see the headline. Geo News Urdu. Don't worry, Pakistan. Crown Prince Saudi Arabia, MBS, announces $3 billion deposit. Out of the 5 billion pledged. So there you go. The UAE shortfall being filled by Saudi Arabia as it is, led to the UAE recognizing that they are in danger of being left behind, and then announcing their own further aids to Pakistan. As Khamis al-Hosseini says on his page, UAE and Pakistan are deepening economic ties with a $10 billion pledged across energy, infrastructure and logistics. DP World is expanding operations in Karachi, reinforcing Pakistan's role in regional trade. It's a steady, long-term partnership built on investment and connectivity. And so the UAE now trying to re-enter the investment opportunities with Pakistan after the Saudis filled the gap that the UAE had left by asking for their 3.5 billion to be paid back. But the arrangement, as you see it, is the security guarantees for the region provided by Pakistan under its nuclear umbrella in return for financial cooperation coming from the oil-rich Gulf states. It is a sustainable relationship. It is a rational and regionally consistent relationship, and it has every opportunity of success, and it predicates the withdrawal of the American troops occupying the bases in the Middle East and the security of the Middle East being taken over by none other than the Sunni Muslim majority nuclear Pakistan. That's what's unfolding right before your eyes, folks. It's an incredibly significant moment. It is the beginning of this grand regional settlement for peace. It is a new era. It is the rise of the Middle East, a revived, peaceful, stable Middle East that will eventually also recognize Israel, because, of course, of the Trump's Gaza Peace Board. Israel is a member. The Accords, whether they are the Abraham Accords, the Cyrus Accords, or the Islamabad Accords now, the Accords will reign. There will be peace. And, of course, the Accordists, one of the activist groups that we founded to support a return to peace in the Middle East, will be delighted at the fact that indeed all of these peace accords do appear as if they're looking more and more likely for the Middle East. So here, even China and Chinese media is recognizing the strategic significance of the Pakistani moves. We're just going to show you that now. South China Morning Post headlined, "What Pakistani jets in Saudi Arabia mean for Gulf security in Iran war." Here's the headline. It's on your screen. Should be able to see it. And we'll read for you an extract from that piece, which also is on your screens now. Pakistan's deployment of an Air Force contingent at a base on Saudi Arabia's Gulf Coast, coming as it mediated talks between Iran and the US, could force Tehran to reconsider its strategy of attacking critical energy infrastructure in the kingdom, analysts say. While purely defensive in nature, the Pakistani Air Force task force posed a poignant question to Tehran. If hostilities resumed, would it be prepared to risk shooting down warplanes belonging to the peacekeeping country it clearly trusts? And there, even the Chinese recognizing that it's game over for Iran in the region. Keep in mind one thing that is important when reading that. The reason why that Chinese piece is in there is because Pakistan is also in the unique position of being in a very good strategic relationship with China as well as with Trump. A lot of people don't know this, but Pakistan's historic relationship with China, the Chinese will know this and Pakistanis know this, but inside Pakistan, there is an idiom, a saying that goes almost without question, and that is that Pakistan's best friend is China. Now, that may sound alarming to people in the West who are concerned about the rise of China. Keep in mind, this is the same Pakistan that Trump says his favorite field marshal, the head of the armed forces in Pakistan. And so it's got this unique relationship with both Trump, and therefore MAGA and America, and with China, and with Iran, and via its mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia. It's almost as if the special relationship is with Pakistan, not with Britain under Keir Starmer. But it is incredibly underestimated and incredibly overlooked element of this all. About, let's say, a few months leading up to this conflict, I spoke to many people, both operationally and just intellectually out of hobby, about the role Pakistan would play, and was routinely dismissed and mocked at the notion that Pakistan would have any sway or influence in the region. And of course, all of those people now stand corrected, because instead, what's happened is comically, we will share this for you. Pakistan has ended up taking center stage in those negotiations. On your screens now is a good, nice little comedic meme video that demonstrates in a funny way the nature of the role Pakistan is currently playing. This, by the way, for those of you who aren't fans, is from Peaky Blinders, the hit UK show based in Birmingham. Peaky Blinders, Cillian Murphy, an amazing show. This is a riff on that, but just have a look at this little clip. Kind of summarizes where we are with all of this. And in case you can't see it because of the text on the right there, the first person spoken to by this Pakistani army officer is labeled US, and then you'll see the other labels pop up as you see them.
But the main thing is, you bunch of fuckers, Despite the provocation from the cavalry, no fighting. Right? No fighting. No fucking fighting. No fighting. No fucking fighting! Good. Get the fuck in. But the main thing.
Now, the last part there, it's hilarious. That is hilarious. The last part there, India walking in and stumbling over themselves, and the character played by Cillian Murphy, labeled now Pakistan, throwing a cigarette at India, is an incredibly accurate commentary of the situation. So this meme is a genius, because it really does articulate what's going on right now, right down to the role that India is playing. And this brings us to the next part of what we would like to discuss, because we've elaborated for everybody the nature of the peace deal, the fact that round 2 is happening, the role that Pakistan has played, and how it forced a strategic recalculation by deploying its troops to Saudi Arabia, 13,000 of them, thereby activating its mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia. What we are now going to touch on is the isolation felt by those countries who have been opposed to this peace for their own reasons. Those who are either ideologues, such as the Ists, the Likudnik Zionists, the Shia Islamist theocrats, and indeed the Hindutva supremacists, the BJP, who also, for their own reasons, have been opposing this peace. If you remember, we said there were two types of groups that oppose the peace, the ideologues and the black pillars. Well, we're now going to address the ideologues, and you can see here that of course, the Iranians, it's clear, we've explained that already, the Iranians were already disciplined by the Pakistani action into reconsidering their rejection of round 1 of those peace talks. But even so, here is Trump making it very clear about the Iranians. Trump says the Iranians have no cards. Very soon after round 1 failed, Trump said the Iranians don't seem to realize they have no cards other than a short-term extortion of the world by using international waterways. The only reason they're alive today is to negotiate. That's from President Trump. We responded there. He's right. They don't. They have within 2 weeks to agree to terms, or the bombing will resume. So you can see there the Iranians already were being relatively isolated. We've spent the majority of this stream demonstrating how Pakistan isolated them by sending troops to Saudi Arabia. So those that opposed peace, the point of this part of the stream is to demonstrate that they will all end up being isolated. The Iranians, we believe we've explained that enough. So we're going to move to the Israelis. Indeed, the ideologues among the Israelis, not, of course, all Israelis, but led by the Likudnik Zionists as they are. And you can see the BBC reported here on your screens, BBC News World. And the headline is, Israelis are war-weary, but most oppose Iran ceasefire, poll suggests. That's according to BBC World. That's on your screens. Now, again, if the Israelis reject the peace, what we're demonstrating is the people or the groups that reject the peace will only end up being isolated. In last week's Dispatch, Radical Dispatch, the title for which is on your screens now, Pakistan secures Iran ceasefire after Trump threatens open the effing strait, praise be to Allah. In that dispatch, we already mentioned this. The extract is on your screens now. We're just going to read it for you. If the assumption holds that certain parties are not interested in peace, rather they seek perma-war, then it goes without saying that those parties would immediately act to spoil the nascent peace process, and both Israel and Iran have form in this regard. And we demonstrated that last week by showing you how Netanyahu began striking at Lebanon, despite the fact that Lebanon was named as part of the peace deal, leading the Pakistanis to name the Israelis. That's on your screens now. Pakistan named the Israelis here. We mentioned this in last week, right? Al Jazeera English reports, Pakistan's foreign minister Ishaq Dar has blamed Israel for trying to spoil Islamabad's efforts to facilitate ceasefire talks between the US and Iran by attacking Tehran when both sides were in a stage to sit down. But importantly, it wasn't just the Israelis that the Pakistanis named. They also named the Iranians. That's on your screens now. And you see in South Asia Index, Pakistani mediators believe that some rogue elements in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard want to sabotage the peace efforts by Pakistan. Today's Iranian attacks on civilian infrastructure in Saudi Arabia being seen as a deliberate effort to derail the talks and push things out of control. So you see, in essence, those two ideological factions we named earlier were already being named by Pakistan as having a vested interest in opposing the peace, but they were being brought to the table, often is the case, against their will because all their resources were being depleted, and Trump and the Pakistanis were forcing them to the table. That's point one as to why that Peaky Blinders meme is so eerily accurate. Point two is the following. We're going to show you now the Indian reaction. If you remember, even India was in that Peaky Blinders meme. Well, this is the Indian reaction. And it's posted by Tejaswi Prakash, a commentator from India. And we're going to play the video after we read his immediate reaction to that video. Mr. Prakash said, "I'm deeply embarrassed by our TV news channels today. A former US diplomat had to bluntly tell our anchors to shut up for pushing their foolish anti-Pakistani agenda during the important Iran-US peace talks in Islamabad. These anchors have become a global joke, so juvenile and obsessed with hate that they made India lose all respect internationally. The biggest act of patriotism these channels can do right now is to stop this clownery and stop embarrassing our country in front of the world. Time to grow up." This is the video he's referencing. As we said, remember, Iran, Israel, and India stand internationally isolated if they oppose the peace. Have a look at this.
They are calling you an aggressor, the United States, and Trump an aggressor. This is the country that you're going to land in. Trump was actually scared whether Vance's security is going to be safe or not, whether he will be secure or not within Pakistan.
He will be safe. And honestly, this is Times Now. This is one of the most esteemed stations in all of India. And you all look like a bunch of school children right now, squabbling over things that really don't make a difference. And I feel like the school teacher about to discipline each and every one of you. This is about lives. This is about livelihood. This is about expensive gasoline for everyday Indians, everyday Americans. And the way you all are squabbling and turning this into a Pakistan versus India dispute is actually quite embarrassing. And I'm going to put you all in the corner and put a hat on you and put you in detention for 30 minutes because this is shameful. The
problem with Israel.
And you heard it there yourselves. That is the point we're making about those with a vested interest in making sure peace fails. They are the ideologues. Those ideologues will name in the Radical Dispatch in the written version of this stream for you tomorrow. Those of you who don't know where to get the written version of this stream, the Radical Dispatch can be found from majidnawaz.substack.com. That's our Radical Media page. We publish the written version of this stream along with a podcast of this stream and the paywalled content behind that written version, as well as a free section for all of our subscribers. We encourage you all to become premium subscribers, paying subscribers, so that you get access to the paywalled content as well as to the podcast version of this Warrior Creed live stream. But we'll publish all of these receipts on there tomorrow for you. But as we have said in the section there entitled Iran, let's read it for you, entitled Iran, Israel, and India internationally isolated. Those three countries are, for various reasons, governed by political factions that are perhaps, it's best to say, ideologically driven to oppose this peace. The Likud Zionists, the Iranian Shia Islamist theocrats, and the Hindutva supremacists in the form of the BJP led by Modi in India, all ideologically driven to oppose the peace. The Black pillars, on the other hand, are those who have little hope and no faith. They are doom and despair all the way because they are perhaps even deliberately wanting to send you into a pit of despair so that you end up submitting to the powers that be in the form of the globalists without any resistance because there's no chance of success. That's the agenda of the Black pillars. And as we hope to be able to demonstrate, both factions are wrong. Peace is indeed coming and it's on the way. And there's every reason to believe that it can be achieved as we've demonstrated. This is President Trump's own slogan, peace through strength, that you're seeing manifested, not just American strength in the form of Trump, but also Middle Eastern NATO strength in the form of the Pakistani-Saudi Mutual Defense Pact. And that's why we've got this particular graphic on your screens now as a reminder of how this is playing out. It's playing out using the military doctrine that Trump has reiterated many times, peace through strength. This is our own adoption of that. as a meme that is appropriate for the Middle East. There's clearly a Muslim prayer mat there, but the point is it applies in the Middle East as well. Pakistan is bringing about peace through strength, and that's why that meme there is there. It is the continuation of the Trump doctrine of peace through strength, that you cannot bring peace to existing warring factions without being stronger than them and forcing them to come to terms. That is the peace through strength doctrine. It is working. President Trump is delivering it. And we think everybody should rejoice that is indeed what is going to happen. And people are beginning to notice. Indeed, even the Saudis have declared that this is indeed what's going on. We're going to play for you a clip from the Saudi foreign minister confirming that this is also their understanding and reading of the situation. That's on your screens now. Saudi sovereignty, national interests above all. To those seeking to understand the core of Saudi foreign policy amidst the global polarization, the answer is clear and decisive. As Foreign Minister Prince Faisal ibn Farhan stated, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia does not set its policies based on the interests of others, but rather on its own interests. We're going to play the clip and then show you or read for you the translation of it after you hear this original Arabic of the clip.
المملكة العربية السعودية وحسب ما أعلم أقول كل الدول العربية لا تضع سياساتها بناء على مصالح الآخرين، تضع سياساتها بناء على مصالحها هي، وسوف نتابع مصالحنا وسوف نستمر في صياغة سياساتنا بناء على تلك المصالح بغض النظر عن وجهات النظر، وسوف نبقى في نفس الوقت منفتحين للحوار مع جميع شركائنا غربا وشرقا لضمان أن يكون هناك تفهم كامل لما نقوم به، وليكون هناك سعي لتحقيق أيضا هذه المنافع المشتركة. المنافع المشتركة ليست فقط لنا مع الصين، لكن لنا مع أمريكا، لنا مع غيرنا، فنحن نسعى خلف مصالحنا، ومصالحنا نجدها في الغرب ونجدها في الشرق، وأينما وجدناها سوف يعني نعمل على تحقيقها.
Now, this is an important clip. And the reason it's an important clip is, as you can see on your screens now by user Sadaf Baloch, Saudi FM Prince Faisal ibn Farhan, era of relying on others is over, is seen as a signal for possible US withdrawal from Saudi Arabia, with Pakistani army filling the gap. Exactly as we've been saying, folks. And that's why we've said Sunni Muslims will once again inherit their own lands. A grand regional settlement for peace is coming. Another user, Saudi this time, Abdussalam Saleh, has said in response to that speech, the era of subservience is certainly over. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt stand united, backed by the Arab peoples. The major powers want to swallow our countries whole. They cannot be trusted. America legitimizes Israeli occupation, while Russia and China legitimize Iranian control over Arab states and the dismantling of their regimes. It's a race towards chaos, but these projects will now be stopped by force. That's Saudi user Abdussalam Saleh. What are they responding to? This speech by the Saudi foreign minister you just heard. We're going to now read the English of that speech for you. It's literally a declaration of independence. The Saudis saying the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and as far as I know, like all Arab states, does not base its policies on the interests of others. It bases its policies on its own interests, and we will pursue our interests and continue to pursue our policies based on those interests, regardless of differing viewpoints. At the same time, we will remain open to dialogue with all our partners, both in the West and the East, to ensure that our actions are fully aligned and that we strive to achieve shared benefits. These shared benefits are not only with China, but also with America and others. We pursue our interests, and we find those interests in the West and in the East, and wherever we find them, we will work to exploit them. It's a bit like that famous British quote: Britain has no permanent friends. Britain has no permanent enemies. Only its interests are permanent. It's a sure sign of a nation discovering its own sovereignty and beginning to assert its sovereignty on the world. That speech by the Saudi foreign minister that we just played you and read a translation from you for is being hailed as a sign that American troops are indeed going to end up withdrawing from the Middle East, and the Pakistanis will fill that security void. So all of this is unfolding as we said it was, that it would, and we are indeed very optimistic for you and believe that a grand regional settlement for peace is on the cards. And confirming our analysis to end today's stream, we're going to leave you with a quote from President Trump, which he issued between round 1 and round 2 of these peace talks. Before round 2 was even confirmed, President Trump was speaking like this, confirming everything. If you've made it this far in the stream, now you're going to see that even President Trump has said this is exactly what's going to happen. What we've said in terms of a grand regional settlement for peace, a golden era for Sunni Muslim Arabs and Sunni Muslims to inherit their own lands finally and guarantee their own security and sell their own energy and oil on a basis of sovereignty. This is how President Trump himself has also said it's going to happen. So you can see that on your screens now. Confirming our analysis, we said President Trump was quick to hail the potential for a grand regional settlement for peace that this ceasefire brings. There you can see it reported by Spectator Index on your screens. Breaking. Trump says this could be the golden age of the Middle East. We're going to read it for you. President Donald Trump, a big day for world peace. Iran wants it to happen. They've had enough. Likewise, so is everyone else. The United States of America will be helping with the traffic buildup in the Strait of Hormuz. There will be lots of positive action. Big money will be made. Iran can start the reconstruction process. We'll be loading up with supplies of all kinds and just hanging around in order to make sure that everything goes well. I feel confident that it will. Just like we are experiencing in the US, this could be the golden age of the Middle East. President Donald J. Trump. And there we have it, folks. It is indeed, and that was said by Trump, by the way, before round 2 of the talks were even announced. This has been years in the making. It's not something that happened yesterday. It's why we're able to reassure everybody that it is going to happen. And it's why we say it with such confidence. A grand regional settlement for peace is on the way. We will see peace in our lifetimes. Of that, you can be sure. It's just a matter of time. Keep watching. Until next week, this has been Maajid Nawaz, the Radical, for the Warrior Creed live stream. We encourage everybody to go to majidnawaz.substack.com to find our Radical Media page. Subscribe there, and you can gain access via your premium paying subscription to the paywalled content, including the full written version of this stream and the podcast version of this stream and other paywalled content, including other interviews, other podcasts, all put together for you under the banner Radical Media. We thank you for your time. Until next time, this has been The Radical, Maajid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.